From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's today's lineup. K-State's Dallas Peterson awaits to talk about the opportunity to achieve good control of field bindweed and burr ragweed on crop ground with a fall herbicide application. Dallas goes over the importance of application timing, and he'll highlight the herbicide choices that will provide the most success. Then K-State's Greg Aldrich will talk about his work with grain sorghum as a primary ingredient in pet food. He and colleagues have developed a sorghum-based product that shows great promise. It'll be showcased at a major pet food industry conference hosted by K-State next week. And standing by with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven, plus more right here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Glad to have you along for another Agriculture Today on this, the K-State Radio Network. Crop producers, we're into a ripe opportunity now for you to control perennial weed problems in your crop ground right here in the fall. And there are strategies attached to each of these we want to cover today with our guest. He's Dallas Peterson, Weed Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. We'll focus on a couple of primary weed issues that we find in Kansas. Field bindweed, burr ragweed. Again, the fall will be most advantageous in controlling these, right?
Well, yeah, it oftentimes is one of the better times of the year to try to attack the perennial weeds. And, unfortunately, we get involved with harvest and planting wheat, and we know everything's going to die back soon, and so sometimes we kind of overlook that. But really, it is a favorable time to use herbicides to try to get a handle on some of the perennial weeds.
Take up field bindweed to start here, and you will find this noxious weed just about anywhere in the state, will you not?
Well, you certainly will. It's very widespread, and most people might be surprised that it's not native to North America, actually. It was introduced from Eurasia, probably actually as a contaminant in winter wheat seed that was brought from Europe. But certainly it is very well adapted to Kansas and really was the original noxious weed for Kansas. That's kind of the reason for the Kansas noxious weed law from the very beginning. So it has been, a serious weed problem for years. It's estimated that we have 2 million acres actually infested with field bindweed. And if anything, that might be an underestimation. If you walk around, it's not long before you see some field bindweed growing. So again, very well adapted to Kansas, very drought tolerant, deep-rooted perennial. That's one of the reasons it's so difficult to control.
And quite competitive with our crop production.
Absolutely. Because of that extensive root system, it can tolerate dry conditions and it can utilize the moisture and the nutrients. And so we plant our crops in the spring, and bindweed is already well established with that root system. And so, again, especially once it starts to get a little bit dry, it can be extremely competitive with our crops. And in the middle of a bindweed patch, we may not even harvest any crop.
There's a different nature to burr ragweed. For one, it's confined to the western part of the state for the most part.
Well, interestingly enough, it is a native species, and both of these are considered noxious weeds in the state of Kansas, which is declared by the legislature, by the way. But it's only one of 2 native weeds that are on that noxious weed list. The other one being hog potato, which is really not very common, to be honest with you, in the state of Kansas. So burr ragweed, or woolly leaf burr sage, it goes by both of those names, is most common in the western part of the state. In fact, we rarely see it east of 135, for example. And the further west you go, the more common it is. And ironically, it seems like it's most prevalent in low-lying areas that tend to stay a little wetter. Even though we think of western Kansas being dry, that's where it seems to thrive. And again, it's a deep-rooted perennial as well and very competitive with our crops. It's a little more behaved, if you will, than field bindweed, whereas bindweed seems like it grows everywhere. It's only confined to that western part of the states, and even in those areas where it occurs, it seems like it doesn't spread across the entire field in many cases. Again, it tends to be located in those lower areas, maybe in the ditches, maybe creeping out in the fields, but certainly not field-wide.
Well, that will lead us right into the herbicide options of choice for the fall application now. And the time window is manageable here?
Well, it is. And again, one of the things that makes these weeds so difficult to control is their perennial nature, because they have such an extensive root system. If you just chop the top off or you just spray a herbicide that burns back the tops, they can regrow from that root system. So we need to use systemic herbicides that translocate down from that top growth and hopefully as thoroughly through that root system as possible. And so there are a couple of different times during their life cycle where we tend to get better translocation or movement down into that root and therefore better long-term suppression. And the first one actually is when they first start to flower, okay? Not when they first come up in the spring, when, there is a tendency, well, as soon as we see it, we need to get out there and hit it. No, that's not the case. We need to let it get some growth so we can get more coverage with the herbicide. But it seems like when they first start to flower, that plant kind of changes that reallocation of the carbohydrates and again starts to move more of it down into the root system. And the root system is also kind of depleted at that point in time because it's been putting a lot of that energy into the top growth. So that's one of the better times. The other good time is in the fall. When we start to get close to those freezing temperatures, again, it seems like that kind of triggers that plant to prepare for that winter dormancy period. And so, again, we start to see more flow of the carbohydrates back down into the root system. When we apply a herbicide under those conditions, consequently, we also get that herbicide moving along with that carbohydrate flow.
So from now, anytime right up to that first freeze.
It really is. It's kind of anecdotal, but we oftentimes say actually the best time with bindweed is after the first light freeze, but before we get a good hard killing freeze. And bindweed actually can tolerate temperatures down to around 22 or 24 degrees. There's some variability in there. It depends on how long it's that cold and all those sorts of things. But as long as we have viable top growth that is growing actively and it hasn't actually froze back, that can be an ideal time actually to make that herbicide application. Now, again, you'd like it to have at least 2 or 3 days prior to that killing freeze as well. So anytime now through the time when we get that real hard killing freeze typically has been pretty effective for getting good control.
So then, product selection, and one option that always comes to mind would be glyphosate. But here in the fall, one might want to look another direction, you say. Yeah,
glyphosate actually will suppress both of these species. But to be honest with you, it's not great unless you get at some really high rates. And so, again, I think through time with repeated applications, it has its effect, but it's not going to really kind of take care of your problem, so to speak. So we tend to look at more aggressive herbicides. And the one through the years, that we've thought of as being one of the better perennial broadleaf weed control herbicides is Tordon. Tordon has some limitations in cropland because it's very long-lived. That's one of the reasons why it's pretty good. And it's especially tough on broadleaf crops. So there are only certain opportunities actually when you can use it. And you do still need to be cognizant of what your future cropping plans are.
So that's a possibility as a tank mix perhaps with 2,4-D?
Yeah, because we can't go at the real high rates of Tordon because of its persistence. Normally, we are going to tank mix it with 2,4-D and or maybe with dicamba or Banville as well. And we do get some additive effect there. So, again, we can't go at a real high rate, probably a maximum of a pint per acre of the Tordon, and then tank mix that, with maybe a quart of 2,4-D and or some dicamba.
Now, you don't want producers to overlook the element of crop rotation as part of the overall control plan here.
Absolutely. And again, that's one major limitation of the use of Tordon. It really fits best between crops and in that fallow period. If you're going back to wheat the next year, you can use it. Or if you're planting sorghum in the spring, there's an 8-month actually waiting period required there as well. So again, it has kind of a a narrow window of application, and the best time actually is if you're going to let it set probably prior to planting wheat again the following fall. That's when you're going to get your best opportunity to use it. And maybe because both of these tend to be patchy, you only spot treat, okay, as opposed to making a broadcast application. But again, you need to be aware of what your future cropping plans are whenever you use Tordon in cropland.
What, if any, options are out there, Dallas, if one is sowing winter wheat this fall? That obviously leaves one a very tiny waiting interval.
Yeah, really there aren't many good options with the burr ragweed or woolly leaf burr sage. But with field bindweed, there is probably an equally effective treatment, and that's one called Facet. Now, it used to be called Paramount, so they made a name change to that product. But that product has been pretty much equally effective, especially with these fall applications, as the Tordon treatment. And it has much shorter crop rotation intervals. And in fact, as you indicated, you can apply it prior to planting wheat this fall without really even any waiting interval. Now, you can apply it after the wheat is planted and up and growing. Also, it can be used ahead of planting sorghum in the spring. And, if you've got bindweed in your growing sorghum crop, we can even use it post-emergence in crop during that season. Now, it's too late for that this year, but that might be something to keep in mind for the future. So Facet definitely is a viable alternative and maybe a good alternative to Tordon because it doesn't have the long rotational intervals. You can plant any crop, I believe, within 8 months after a Facet application.
Well, we'd endorse the use of the Chemical Weed Control Guide from K-State. All of the particulars on rates with the various options at hand fully covered there.
Yeah, they are, but still you have to refer to those labels because there's a lot of detail that we can't put all of that detail, unfortunately, into the Weed Control Guide.
Check out that guide if you haven't already online at agronomy.ksu.edu, a hard copy available through your local extension office, and have a look at the recent Agronomy e-update articles on fall control of bindweed and burr ragweed control with early fall treatments, also at agronomy.ksu.edu. Dallas, as always, thanks for the comments.
Nice to be here.
Dallas Peterson, Weed Control Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, along with us on Agriculture Today. And we'll be back in a moment on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today returns now, and we'll talk about an outlet for grain production here in Kansas. We don't often think about as commonly as we do other uses of our grains, but it is a primary opportunity to move grains into the commercial sector, and that is through pet food production. K-State grain scientist Greg Aldrich is here, and his specialty here at the university is on pet food research. And we want to get into some of the current work that he's involved with in a moment and let you know about a couple of events coming up soon that are aligned with this area of pet food production. Greg, first of all, give us a reminder of the importance of the pet food industry. It's substantial.
Yes, it is, Eric. Good morning. Thank you. And so the pet food industry in the U.S. is about a $30 billion enterprise. It grows at about 4% year over year. It is what we consider recession-proof or at least recession-resistant. People will feed their pets even when they don't have enough money to pay their rent or feed themselves. So even through the economic downturn of 2007 and 8, pet food volume and dollar volume actually increased. In the state of Kansas, it actually represents the 4th largest export out of our state. We battle it out between Missouri and Kansas in terms of the highest production and the highest rate of employment in the pet food sector across the nation. So we're literally sitting in the center of the pet food universe here. It is a substantial part of our economic turnover in the state of Kansas, and there are estimates that range anywhere from $5 to $7 billion to our local economy. And so it's a pretty significant play. The part that I really like about it is it's actually about value-added agriculture. So we're taking raw agricultural commodities, and in some cases some of the co-product streams from human food production, and we're converting those into high-value foods, consumer packaged goods, for animals that we share our homes with. And so it's a vibrant part of our economy, and there's a lot of opportunities yet that we as Kansans can take advantage of.
Standard ingredients in pet foods on the grain side would include what then?
Well, so the largest volumes, of course, would still be our primary commodities. It would be corn, rice, wheat. We'll use a number of co-product streams like wheat middlings, rice bran, and the such. There is a fair amount of beet pulp that's used. It's a co-product from the sugar beet industry. And then, of course, in the proteins, we're looking at meat and bone meal, beef, chicken. Chicken's probably the number one protein source. So it's the actual meat itself, or it could be the byproduct meals, chicken byproduct meal or poultry byproduct meal. We're also seeing a great deal of turkey and some pork come into the pet food sector. So we're users of a lot of protein and a lot of agricultural commodities from this region.
Now, you have considerable work in motion on this front, and
yeah.
We wanted to center on one in particular today as we talk, and it involves one of our leading crops in Kansas,
right.
Grain sorghum.
Exactly.
And you're looking at its potential as a pet food ingredient.
All right. And so that's the one I left off of that list before, but sorghum is becoming there's a growing awareness of sorghum or milo in its use or potential for use in companion animal diets. We've been supported in a number of studies in our department, in my lab specifically, from the U.S. Sorghum Checkoff Program, and we've been looking at ways that we can take sorghum and two things. One is increase its awareness to the consumer so they can recognize that it is a wholesome, high-quality grain that could be used as a starch source in companion animal diets. And the second is to look at ways that we could value-add sorghum so that we could increase the opportunities for it to fit into a functional capacity, food functionality, the physical attributes of its processing into a pet food system. And we've done a number of those projects recently. We're getting ready to do another one coming up, and I'll let you segue into that in regards to our Pet Food R&D Showcase next week.
Absolutely, which we'll talk of. That's a big event here coming up on campus.
Right.
But how would you augment, if you will, grain sorghum as a pet food? What needs to happen there to make it a viable product?
Well, first off, grain sorghum by itself, whole ground grain sorghum included into a pet food will function quite effectively, both from a processing and from a nutritional standpoint for any other starch source in the product. And so if it was a corn-based pet food, sorghum would fit just fine in there. Most of the data that we've seen thus far would suggest that grain sorghum is equal to the corn or wheat or other rice in a pet food in regards to digestibility and its effects on stool condition. Those are one of those important things we always have to talk about with pets is what they leave behind. And it has been equal to or better in some circumstances than the traditional grains. So by itself doesn't necessarily need anything. But there are some opportunities if we go through the milling process, just like we would go through wheat milling into flour, is to take advantage of some of the unique properties of sorghum. One is the flour is gluten-free, so it has a different characteristic to wheat flour if we're using it into some types of foods. And in our experiments in extrusion, creating these dry banded kibbles, we found that it actually gave us tremendous expansion and the overall digestibility was improved. And so if we're trying to create a diet that's specifically focused on a high digestibility, low residue, or some other sorts of expansion capabilities in those kibbles, then a sorghum flour may be the ideal choice. Now, the other section of that is the pericarp or the seed coat. And we were able to harvest, in addition to the flour, the bran layer. And this bran layer or this mill feed layer is very high in fiber. That's good, number one, because we all need a little bit more fiber in our diet. We designed specific levels of fiber into pet foods so that we can get good gastrointestinal health. But the fiber component, this seed coat of sorghum, also is enriched with phenolic compounds, and these are the things that give them the color. Some would call them reduced tannins. And these reduced tannins have an antioxidant property. And we were able to show in our research that not only were those antioxidants available to the dog in their digestion, but it showed up in the bloodstream. And we were able to demonstrate that we could increase by at least twofold the antioxidant level, just general antioxidant level in the circulation of dogs.
Wow.
And so it may have some nutraceutical application. Now, in the future, what we want to do is figure out what the perfect dose is, and if we need to do any other pre-treatment of that mill feed and concentrate it to any other level. We think that there's some opportunities in there to also look at the other various colored sorghums to see if we can demonstrate one has more advantage over another. Huge marketing opportunities, and we hope that there'll be some support for that in the near future.
Talk a moment in our remaining time, Greg, about, well, first of all, this big gathering here at Kansas State University. It is a pet food research and development showcase at which you'll be talking about this grain sorghum-based pet food work. What's going on here next week, actually?
So next week, we have an event that we've been working together in partnership with Watt Global Media to have this event here on campus. It's a bit of an extension and outreach opportunity, and it's also an awareness-building opportunity. So far, we've got about 120 people signed up to come in. There'll be manufacturers, equipment suppliers, ingredient suppliers, academics, students, staff. And the theme is treats, toppers, and inclusion. So we're really going to focus on this value-add market in pet food, hands-on demonstrations. And the one that my student and I, Julia Pizzali and I are working on, and it's sponsored by the Sorghum Checkoff, is we're looking at the ability to produce a gluten-free rotary molded biscuit with sorghum using animal proteins as binders. And so we're working out some of the details on that, but it should be pretty exciting. The idea at the end of the day is to look at sorghum as another opportunity area that we really haven't seen any sorghum use. Today, I know of, there's really no sorghum treats in the pet category. We're also working on another project aside from that in the treats category that was sponsored by the Kansas Department of Agriculture and the Ag Marketing Services, USDA, to come up with sorghum crisps in a granola bar intended for dogs. And so we're really trying to get on that product development, creative edge, looking for new market opportunities for these commodities. And these kinds of shows are a real conduit for that to happen.
Or this will be the who's who in the pet food industry attending, so great exposure for sorghum's potential as a pet food ingredient. Really quickly, lastly here, this is early in 2019. You will be conducting at the IGP Institute here at K-State an instructional session on pet food production, right?
Exactly, yeah. One of the things is we joke about is that there's not enough young people or new folks coming into this business that know how to do the formulation. And so we created this course that's taught during the intersession so students and non-students, professionals in the industry could come in and participate. And it's a week-long hands-on course that the participants can learn how to do pet food formulation. Now, it's not for cottage-style formulation, but this is using sophisticated formulation software. They could bolt on, be ready to go to work for any of the major pet food companies or their own company to do formulation of baked, extruded, canned, and other types of specialty products, the formulation process to be able to get a solution that meets all of the animal's nutrient requirements.
That session is the 14th through the 18th of January at the IGP Institute. You can go to grains.ksu.edu/IGP for more on that. Tremendous work in this area. Greg, keep it up. And thanks for the briefing right here.
All righty. Thank you, Eric.
He is a grain scientist at K-State. Once again, his work centers on the use of grains in pet food production and telling us, among other things, about his current work with grain sorghum in that respect. That's Greg Aldrich on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and now to today's agricultural news page and these headlines. These courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the U.S. Chief Agricultural Negotiator says that several issues related to U.S. wheat access into the Canadian marketplace were addressed with the new deal between the trading partners. Here's more on that from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Dairy was the high-profile ag issue connected to U.S., Mexican, and Canadian negotiations that led to what is being called the USMC trade agreement. But as the chief ag negotiator of the U.S. Trade Representative's office, Greg Dowd, notes, wheat was also a sticking point in ag trade between our nation and our northern neighbor. Specifically, U.S. wheat could only be sold in Canada as feed wheat.
In trade terms, we say that does not meet the terms for national treatment. In other words, they have to treat our wheat the same as their wheat if it's the same quality.
The recent agreement between the U.S. and Canada, however, means that
Canada has now agreed to grade imports of U.S. wheat in a manner no less favorable than Canadian wheat, and that's a big step forward.
Ambassador Dowd adds Canada will no longer require a country of origin labeling statement on U.S. wheat imports.
Now, there's some things related to seed use that are a little uncertain at this point, but a North Dakota farmer should be able, if he wants to use a Canadian elevator across the border, he ought to be able to do that now as a result of this.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
With the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement now set, officials made clear in remarks in unveiling the pact that the U.S. steel and aluminum import duties applied to Canada and Mexico were not removed with the trade agreement. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross described those as separate issues, and Mexico and Canada say they expect those tariffs to be worked out on a separate negotiating track. President Trump said the U.S. was talking with Mexico and Canada about potentially replacing those with quotas. Also unresolved is whether Canada and Mexico will continue retaliatory tariffs on American products, including agricultural goods. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer indicated those talks were coming soon, and Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland also indicated they will be a focal point moving ahead. So far, no talks are scheduled as of yet, but the matter is being closely followed by several industries, including agriculture. Some 99% of domestic and 90% of imported foods tested by the Food and Drug Administration in fiscal year 16 were compliant with federal tolerances for pesticides. That's according to the agency's latest residue monitoring report. FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb hailed those findings and said the report shows that overall levels of pesticide chemical residues don't pose a risk to consumers. For the fiscal year 16 report, the FDA tested 6,500 foods from 46 U.S. states and 98 countries for 700-plus pesticides and industrial chemicals. The violation rates of less than 1% for domestic foods and 10% for imported foods are consistent with past reports, as is the higher rate of violations for imported foods, according to the FDA. Now, the 25 domestic samples found in violation included 21 pesticides that don't have an EPA tolerance and 4 that contained levels in excess of tolerances. Of the 400-some import samples in violation, 280 had no tolerance violations. 64 were found to have residues above the EPA standard. The bulk of those import violations were rice and rice products. Some 19% of those products found in violation. 10% of imported vegetables sampled were in violation, and 8% of other food products, including seeds, oils, honey, candy, spices, and dietary supplements, had residues in violation of federal standards. President Trump is expected next Wednesday to use an appearance in Council Bluffs, Iowa, as the format to announce that he's instructing the EPA to move ahead on allowing year-round sales of E15. The action also is expected to be in combination with other potential changes to biofuel policy, with indications being that the additional actions will focus on reducing volatility in the market for renewable identification numbers, or RINs. Reports indicated the effort will focus on potentially limiting the level of RINs that can be held or traded by those not needing them to prove compliance with the renewable fuel standard. It appears any action on E15 will involve EPA seeking public comment, and any year-round E15 action could still likely end up being challenged in court. In other headlines, expiration of the 2014 Farm Bill now means that the USDA will not be enrolling any new acres in the Conservation Reserve Program, and the program now has far less than the 24 million acres in it. Until a new farm bill is passed or the current law is extended, some other action is taken. The Farm Service Agency will not approve any new CRP contracts or process offers for enrollment for all CRP sign-up types, and they will not authorize any CRP contract revisions or corrections. Payments under the CRP will be issued. That started earlier this week, but that will be about the extent of what can happen there. And Smithfield Foods CEO Kenneth Sullivan says that some of the latest innovation in plant-based meat is not going to cut it with consumers who are looking for food with simpler ingredients, what the industry calls clean label food. He pointed out at the Wall Street Journal's Global Food Forum that the most realistic plant-based burgers have many unrecognizable ingredients, and cellular-based meat grown in labs still face questions about the science and if it is safe. Environmental Defense Fund President Fred Krupp said there's no question that eating plants is better for the planet. He also added you have to be in denial to think that the world is going to stop eating meat. A brief calendar item to bring to the attention of you hog producers. It's the annual Swine Day here at Kansas State University. It is now set for Thursday, November the 15th, just over a little more than a month from now here on the campus. That event will kick off with its technology trade show at 8 o'clock in the morning. The venue, once again, is the K-State Alumni Center on the south end of the campus. During the morning session of the Swine Day, K-State faculty will give updates on their latest research impacting producers in 15-minute rotations. They'll cover topics on swine nutrition, management, feed processing, and feed safety. The afternoon program will begin with David Hogg and Sarah McReynolds from the Kansas Department of Agriculture discussing the benefits of implementing secure pork supply for producers. And the director of the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory at Iowa State University, Roger Main, will cover emerging diseases and how diagnostic labs are adapting to help producers deal with those. The day will wrap up with a reception then at 3:30 in the afternoon. Registration $25 per person if paid by November the 7th, $50 after that date or at the door. Registration available as well as details on the program at ksuswine.org. ksuswine.org. The 2018 Swine Day at Kansas State University, all set now for Thursday, November the 15th at the K-State Alumni Center. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
It's just a corner. May even be an odd corner.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Last week we had some perfect fall weather, and I could make the most of it thanks to Matt, my grandson. He reminded me early in the week with a phone call that he would be there early on Wednesday. That was a week ago today. Lo and behold, when I drove up, his big truck was already pulled up, and he walked around the corner. We quickly went inside. We finished breakfast and loaded my truck up with chainsaws and all one needs to keep them running. As a last item, we set a raccoon in the live trap in the truck. Another one caught that night. Earlier this summer, when Matt and I drove on the farm, he had seen what all needed to be done as far as fallen tree removal. And he had then said, I will come out for 3 days to help you near the end of September. My trouble and worry was, no way could I keep up with him. Working together, though, it was fun. He is muscle all over, and he's young, but no longer a child, as he has been in Afghanistan as a Marine. I changed clothes and put my boots on, and we were ready to go. Near the beginning of the farm I stopped, and we let a raccoon go into the wooded part along the stream. It's a corner with big old trees with broken branches. I could have started working there, but had other needs. There were branches laying across the main drive and the crossings, which I wanted to cut up first. To make the work pay off, I would cut the branches into firewood, and we would load as we went, throwing the tops back into the woods. We drove to the gate. Matt jumped out and carefully laid the wire gate down, avoiding the poison ivy. Pretty soon we saw a large flock of turkeys scoot away. They were not in a real hurry, but must have found the edge of the woods safer than the open brome field. We counted 28, many young birds. As we cleared the farm road through the trees along the creek, we spied them a few more times. It dawned on me as we worked, cut and loaded, how much time our land takes. I've thought about this before. It's a good 430 acres, but very diverse topography, with different fields along the creeks. Some fields larger, others just a small 2-acre patch. We have grown wheat, oats, alfalfa, and soybeans. Now, for many years the cropland has been in brome grass, cut for quality hay. It's easier management and holds the soil. That was obvious again after the recent hard rains. There were places where the grass was pushed flat, as water had come across in torrents. No erosion of the fields. There's only one crossing where tractor work is needed. I've compared it with the more level parts of our state, where 400 acres would all be in wheat, beans or corn. Just one large field. You just drive in with the big equipment, prepare the soil, plant, grow, and harvest. Then winter comes with snow, and all lies dormant. That probably would be far more productive land. But good as that land would be, it would not hold my interest for the landscape. I just love the diversity of our piece of land, part of the Flint Hills. It's just a corner, and maybe an odd corner. We drove home with a good load of firewood. It had been a good day. We sharpened the chainsaw for the next day. On Thursday, we drove out again and continued cleaning and cutting. Years ago, I planted a few pin oaks along the edge of the small pond. The pin oak is a hard-to-grow tree on limestone soil. It loves acidic soils, but there along the murky edge, I felt pin oak might just like it. And apparently they did, as they've grown on neglect. Of course, the bug found the young saplings, but except for 1 or 2, did not destroy them. This year with Matt, I placed protective netting around them. What I like about the pin oak is the deep red fall color. Doing all that, I look at myself and ask, what farmer am I? And I found the answer in that I love the land. The last day, the third day Matt helped me, we loaded up the heavy walk-behind mower. It's a great mowing machine, but a walk-behind. The day was planned for mowing the trails. Last year and the year before, I didn't get to it, and it showed. It started off with the welcoming party of the 28 turkeys. That was a good sign. We drove across the field first, dipped the creek, and drove to the walnut planting. There the trail goes through the trees and swings up the hill down along the big pond, always keeping the woods to one side and the open range and a fence to the other. Mowing is work. Matt kept in front of me, or at least he tried, cutting away the low-hanging branches. He had to hustle, as over the years branches had grown down. At times, Matt and I would swap tasks. When I saw 2 big trees had fallen across the trail, I knew that would be the end of the day. I started to cut up those 2 trees and toss the pieces back over the fence line. Matt stopped the mower and helped the old man. It's amazing what a young man, strong guy, can pick up. I will come back and clear the dumped wood away from the fence. I'll cut what can go in the fireplace on a cold evening, and the rest will make a brush pile for wildlife. No waste there. Okay. I should not forget to pull the fence back up and clip the barbed wire. A farmer's work is never done.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. And that'll do it for our Wednesday edition. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.